Is there any ideas that anyone has for it, apart from what's being planned at present?
I haven't been privy to any conversations around that. I think local residents' current attention is being taken very much by the current proposals, if you can imagine. They're really concentrating on how to deal with the fairly aggressive plans for this site at the moment, rather than worrying what may come thereafter, I'm afraid.
I think, to be fair, Councillor McFarlane, also you're inviting people to speculate on what isn't before us, so we couldn't really take that into account. Are there any further questions?
Apologies, Chair.
Okay, in that case, thank you very much, Mrs. Greenwood. Could I invite you to turn off your camera and microphone, but do feel free to remain in the meeting and observe the debate. So I'd now like to go back to our planning officer, who may wish to pick up on and respond to some of the issues that have been addressed by the public speakers. Mr. Law, is there anything you want to come back on?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the most important one, just to clarify, is in terms of parking. Yeah, 12 spaces, so 2 per dwelling. That is in line with the advice of Appendix C in the Cheshire East local plan, so it does accord with the parking standards. In relation to sort of the landscape buffer to the north of the site, where it abuts Oakfield Close, there will be a gap, and the scheme has been amended to move plot 3 away from the boundary, so there will be scope for an appropriate boundary treatment with those existing properties. So there is a gap, and the built form isn't directly on the boundary, as mentioned by one of the speakers. And in terms of, it's just important to note, in terms of the maintenance and also access rights over Buckhorn Street, and also the private access, the pedestrian access, those are civil matters for agreement between the parties and any relevant landowners. They're not material planning considerations. With respect to the highway improvement works, which will involve a partial loss of the verge on the opposite side of Hayes Lane, adjacent to the access, that will result in the carriageway moving further over. I think it's by 2 metres, but my colleague Mr. Jones will correct me if I'm wrong there. There is sufficient space on that side to still allow the pavement to be retained on that side, and that is all I want to come back on at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Law. I think maybe questions from members now, back to our planning officers. I can see that Councillor Dean would like to ask a question. I would like to ask one also.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, please, Mr. Law. First one, in your summary on page 52, a bit of a query really. In your last paragraph, you said the proposal is for sustainable development, which would bring environmental, economic and social benefits. I'm just wondering what the environmental benefits are of this scheme.
I'll perhaps take 2 or 3 questions and then go back to Mr. Law. So if you'd like to ask your second one, Councillor Dean.
As I understand it, at least 4 of these properties are 4-bedroom houses. I may be out of date, but I thought 4-bedroom houses needed 3 parking spaces these days because of the likelihood of teenage children having a 3rd car. Am I wrong?
Thanks. And Councillor Nicholas, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick clarification about parking. There's no visitor parking. Is there any requirement to have that? And also, it was mentioned there's no refuse areas. I'm just wondering if there's any issue about that. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Nicholas. And Councillor Smetham, please.
Thanks. I was wondering if there is any possibility to ensure the properties stay as bungalows. I've never heard of a condition on bungalows being made permanent, but it's an interesting one, isn't it?
I think I mean, obviously I'll go back to the officer, but I think if I remember correctly, Councillor Smetham, there's a condition proposed on restricting permitted development, which would address that. I'd like to add my question. I'll go back to Mr. Law, if that's okay. It concords with the point that Councillor Dean raised. Actually, in your presentation, you described Alderley Edge as a key service centre. That isn't the case. Alderley Edge is a local service centre, and I do wonder whether that is where there has been some perhaps misunderstanding in terms of parking standards. The requirement for a local service centre for 4-bedroom properties is that they provide 3 spaces within the curtilage of the site. So could I ask you to confirm whether that's a mistake, and that Alderley Edge is in fact a local service centre, not a key service centre? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of the parking arrangements, yes, you're quite right in terms of apologies for that mistake. It is Alderley Edge is a local service centre, as you can see in the main report. In terms of the parking standards, they've been assessed by our highways officer as being acceptable in this case. So in terms of that point, I'll come back to you on it, but just bear with me a second. I'll move on to the further points at the moment. In terms of Councillor Nicholas's point about visitor parking, there isn't any visitor parking, but parking standards don't require that for this kind of residential accommodation. With respect to refuse areas, in terms of it being serviced, I did show you in my presentation that basically there's a turning area adjacent to one of the plots, the Hip to Roof bungalow, which will provide adequate turning area for a refuge vehicle to come in off Buckhorn Street and turn around within the site and service these 6 houses. With respect to the actual storage of bins, there's condition 13 recommended on page 66 of the agenda reports part, which would require submission of details of bin storage within the areas of the plots. So we would deal with that by way of condition. In terms of Councillor Smetham's point about bungalows, I think you dealt with that, Chairman, in terms of the bungalows are what are before us and what proposed, and that is what we're assessing for those units. Any change to those in the future would be for assessment at that moment in time. Right, in terms of environmental benefits raised by Councillor Dean, whilst the site has been cleared of vegetation, it wasn't deemed from an ecological point of view to be of high quality in that regard, and the application is supported by ecological assessments. So in terms of environmental benefits, we would see ecological benefits through conditions 18 and 19, which would result in basically secure biodiversity enhancements, and more generally in terms of the environmental sense, by permitting 6 market residential dwellings within a sustainable location, would accord with our environmental aims of focusing development within the key and local service centres as well as the principal towns. So in terms of parking, I think it may be worth moving on to Mr. Jones in light of his no objection to the application on parking grounds.
Thanks very much, Mr. Law. Councillor Smetham, your camera's on. I'm not sure whether you're aware. Did you want to come in and ask a question? No, thank you. So I'll move on to Mr. Jones, ask him to address the issue around parking, please.
Thanks, Chair. I thought it would come to this. In terms of standards, the key question is whether we determine this site to be a principal town or a major service centre. Alderley Edge, because we've taken it as being one of those. And if you use it, if it is a principal town or a major service centre, then our standards require 2 spaces for 3 bedrooms and above. So if this is 4 or 5 bedroom units, it would require 2 spaces. Now, if you don't believe it's a principal town or a major service centre, then it requires 3 spaces. So that's where the difference comes in. It's whether you determine this to be a sustainable site or in a principal town, and that's what we've taken on this, Chair.
Thanks very much for that. Any further questions, members, before we move to the debate? Councillor Murphy, please.
Yes, could I just get some further clarification on the conditions attached to the on page 66? There've just been reference made to them, 18 and 19. What are the exactly the measures does the council have in mind for the nested bird mitigation, and likewise with the scheme of biodiversity? Who's going to decide whether or not these schemes and measures are going to be acceptable or not acceptable?
Thanks, Councillor Murphy. I'll defer back to our planning officer to provide an answer on that. Before I do, Councillor Findlow, you'd like to ask a question as well?
Thank you, Chairman. Just so I'm clear, existing policy, I understand, says that new developments must provide safe and convenient access for vehicles and pedestrians. I don't see how that applies here. Could someone advise?
Thanks, Councillor Findlow. Mr. Law, would you like to come back on those 2 questions?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of Councillor Murphy's question about what the ecological or biodiversity enhancements will comprise, that detail will be secured by condition, and as a council we're very fortunate to have the benefit of nature conservation officers who would assess that to ensure that the proposals put forward would result in an enhancement. They would usually take the form of bird boxes and bat tubes, basically integrated into the fabric of the proposed houses. So those are examples of what we, on a site such as this, those are examples of what we would usually secure. Other things can comprise of gaps in the boundary treatments to facilitate hedgehogs travelling through, and also the planting as well, where there's any hedgerows, soft landscaping, whether they could be of native species planting to help with wildlife. So those are some examples of what we ordinarily do on other sites. That would be reserved for condition. In terms of Councillor Finlow's request about how the site could be safely accessed and conveniently accessed, as I said, in terms of my presentation, there are highway improvement works to Buckhorn Street, where it junctures with Hayes Lane. So that basically involves a build out of the curb line to allow vehicles better visibility when they're emerging from Buckhorn Street. That will also allow safe and convenient access and egress by pedestrians. In terms of this proposal, there are 2 routes that pedestrians could take, either off Buckhorn Street or via the existing pedestrian access between the existing terrace properties, which are to the sort of south-west corner of the site. So there's 2 sort of separate pedestrian accesses to the site. So officers, including highways officers, are satisfied that it can be safe and conveniently accessed, both by vehicle and by pedestrian. Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to the junction, I was referring to the rest of the lane. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we should probably move on to the debate now, and that's usually the local board member, which in this case, of course, is me. So I thought I'd just start by just giving a little bit of background on what this site is or was. It was in fact previously an allotment site which was provided for the use of the cottages. on Hayes Lane, and there was a question earlier on about the character. Those cottages were originally railwaymen's cottages built when the Crewe to Manchester railway line came through Alderley Edge in 1843. The site has been, as has been mentioned, over a period of time, the allotments became disused, overgrown, and were under the ownership of one local resident who, I don't remember the exact date, it was around about 2013, passed away and left the site to the RSPCA, perhaps naively in the belief that they would retain it as a nature and wildlife area. And of course, as we've seen from the application today, that's not been the case. In the interest of adding some kind of balance to what I want to say, it doesn't surprise me terribly that this site has come forward for a development proposal, given that it was sold on. And the inclusion of 2 bungalow units is, of course, to be welcomed. But having said that, I do have some issues with the report, and also have some issues with a comment that's just been made by a highways officer as well. Firstly, in terms of the report, it references Neighbourhood Plan Policy AE17 and seeks to explain how the application is consistent with that. I think that might be a mistake, because Neighbourhood Plan Policy AE17 relates to the provision of public car parks and relates to commercial developments rather than residential. But similarly, remains silent on Neighbourhood Plan Policy AE4, which specifically states that backland development and development in gardens will be resisted. And so I'm a bit surprised that that policy wasn't appraised within the report. Similarly, policy AE9 of the neighbourhood plan, which says that development must provide linkage for pedestrians and cyclists. And of course, this proposal struggles to do that, because, as we've heard, there is no automatic right of access. Yes, there's a pedestrian ginnel which has just been referenced, but there's no automatic right of access to that, as the report acknowledges. Also, in terms of Buckhorn Street, there's no automatic right of access there either, as is acknowledged on page 61 of the report. Also, the report on page 59 says that the impact on the street scene will be neutral. I'm struggling to understand how the removal of a footpath for some residents can be seen as a neutral impact. And then finally, this goes back to the point that's just been made by a highways officer. The parking provision isn't consistent with the local plan strategy parking standards. We've been asked to decide whether Alderley Edge is a principal town or whether it's a major service centre. Well, it's neither of the above. It's a local service centre, as is set out in the local plan strategy, and also as is set out in the neighbourhood plan. So just to finish, because I won't go on for too long, but I had a few questions that I thought were kind of pertinent for members. So as we heard, the previous scheme for 8 dwellings in 2018 was refused under delegation due to impact of the character of the area, design and the amenity for neighbours. So the question that I'd ask members to look at there is, does this scheme that's before us today address those? Policy SE4 of the local plan, and I'll have to read this because I can't remember what the policies say word for word, but it says that developments are expected to provide suitable mitigation for the restoration of damaged landscape areas and to protect, restore and enhance the character and appearance of the local area. Well, from the application before us, I can't see that being provided either on site or off site. So how important is that for members? The parking standards I've already mentioned. Given that Alderley Edge is a local service centre, there will be a requirement for the 4-bed properties to provide 3 on-site spaces, and from the application they're only providing 2. So again, how important is that? Is it for members that the proposal isn't policy compliant in that respect? And then policy DC 38 of Safe Policy DC 38 of the Macclesfield Borough local plan says that the separation distance from principal window to principal window should be between 21 and 25 metres. Well, as the report sets out on page 63, the proposal is 17 metres from frontage to frontage. So again, my question would be, consider how important it is that that doesn't appear to be policy compliant. Policy CO1 of the local plan says that proposal should give priority to walking and public transport within their design and improve pedestrian facilities. Well, I don't expect this to do anything about public transport. It's clearly without its remit. But there's a question as to how the removal of the footway on Hayes Lane for some residents is consistent with that requirement to improve pedestrian facilities. And how important is that also in terms of providing and supporting active travel and our sort of active travel policies as a council. And then finally, the internal consultee, and this goes back to a question that was raised in the public speaking. Our landscape character internal consultee concluded that the proposals were too close to the northwest boundary of the site to allow appropriate landscaping. So again, how important is that going to be in terms of residential amenity, particularly for the residents of Oakfield Close, which are the properties that abut the northwest boundary of the site, particularly given that, and this wasn't really picked up on in the report, Oakfield Close is between 1 and 2 metres lower in terms of the lie of the land than the proposed development site. I've probably said enough for now, so I'll give way to hear the views of other members, starting with Councillor Smetham, please.
Thank you. Can you clarify for me, were you speaking as the ward councillor, as the member and chair of this committee, or as an objector? And will you be leaving this meeting to be chaired by the deputy chair now?
I'm speaking as the ward councillor opening the debate, Councillor Smetham.
So have you declared an interest or fettered your discretion at this moment?
No, because I've said that in terms of balance, I can understand why the application site has come forward. I can see how it lends itself to some form of appropriate development, but I've also questioned and sought to identify some questions that members might ask as to whether what's proposed before us is that appropriate form of development.
That sounded very much like a speech of opposition to me. Perhaps the legal people will look into it for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go next, please?
I'd say, Chairman, I thought what we've just heard is most regrettable. I would defend your right as the ward member to say what you've said. That's what we have ward members for.
Thank you, Councillor Findlow. That's appreciated.
Sure.
Councillor Dean, please.
Going back to the debate, I have to say that in principle, I'm very wary of backland and garden development per se, and I have to say this looks to me as the way it is certainly in plots 4 and 5. Crammed against the boundary. Plot 3 has been moved a little away according to the planning officer, but it still looks terribly crammed in to me, and I'm concerned. I don't know where people are going to put the bins when they have to make their third parking space for the 4-bedroom plots. They're going to lose the little bits of grass at the front as well, will make it look even more crowded and crammed in. Visitors parking visitors will definitely come. They will definitely park down there somewhere and get in the way of everybody else's egress and ingress. I just think it's a badly designed scheme, and we should not give it permission. Personally, that's my view.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Harewood, please.
Thank you, Chair. We do have policies for backland development, which has just raised its head. But what I wanted to, a few things I wanted to say is, we have not shown that there is just one type of building around there. We have not shown that we have a specific other use of the land, or that the land is not adequate for that number of buildings. Is it adequate or is it not? That access will be compromised in such a way that it cannot be used. What is the reason for, I look at the parking and I would like some answers to the parking. But I cannot see why an overgrown piece of land should be left overgrown and not used because of it was for planting when there was railway houses. It is no longer so. It is what we are dealing with now. It is no longer that type of land. Is there a principal objection to putting buildings on it? And what is the real principal objection? Because it is an overgrown piece of land, as far as I could see, that could accommodate some building. And if we can have conditions with those buildings, I feel that it will be a good use of that piece of land that is derelict, overgrown, and we have not seen or heard where it will actually benefit the area, as there is no specific land, no specific kind of house. There is no specific. There are terrace houses and little houses. Why is it so bad? So unless there is some reason why no houses should be put there, I'll be glad to listen to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Councillor Puddicombe, please. Councillor Dean, your camera's still on. Councillor Puddicombe, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm off now. Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the points that you made, which I personally found very helpful. I would hope that local residents would accept that this piece of land is ideal for building. But I think, as Councillor Dean pointed out, it has to be the right sort of scheme. I don't think this particularly is. And certainly I was surprised by the comments of Mr. Jones about parking, and you know, I'm surprised that officers don't know what the parking requirement should be for a particular piece of land, and what a particular place is what sort of service centre it is. So I mean, I would like to support some sort of development here, but not this particular scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Puddicombe. Councillor Mannion, please.
We've been at the meeting several hours already, so I'm not going to say too much other than to, yes, as the ward member, it was very helpful, your contribution. And I can't really add anything to what Councillor Puddicombe and Councillor Harewood have said. Yes, this site is appropriate for development, but I think we're trying to squeeze a pint into a quart into a pint pot. It's just too much. Yes, space standards are greater these days because we lay out our developments for that innovation of the 20th century, the motor car. And my view is it's just too much on that site. So I'm struggling to support the officer's recommendation for this scheme. I have no problems whatsoever with the site being developed, and the issue over its ownership and how it came to be in the ownership of the developer are not planning issues. But sticking to the planning issues directly, I just think it's too much for the size of the size of the development site. So I'm struggling to support the officer's recommendation as it stands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Findlow, please.
Well, it's a case of density. It's a case of density, a case of overdevelopment. And like Councillor Mannion, I am not against development of this site, provided it is relevant and appropriate for the size and scope of what's there. And I don't understand how, despite what we've been told, it provides safe and convenient access for both vehicles and pedestrians. So if another scheme came forward, which was less ambitious, I could well be in favour of it, but not this one.
Thank you. Councillor Holland, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was wondering, with all the comments and the fact that people do consider that this could be an appropriate piece of land for development, is it worthwhile to suggest or consider deferring this while we have some clarity on the parking issues? Because I'm with you on this, on the parking. I think if we are supposed to have 3 parking spaces and there's some confusion over that, then I think there needs some clarity. So is deferral an option, I suppose, is my question.
I think what we have to do is make a decision on what is before us rather than what we would prefer to be before us, perhaps, or what isn't before us. But I will go back to the officer just to seek clarity on that, Councillor Holland, after Councillor McFarlane has spoken.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just my penny's worth. I'd agree with my fellow councillors. I think it's overdevelopment. This site, I think, should be built on. It's rough land, but there's just too much going on currently, as far as I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Your camera's come back on. Did you want to come in again, or was it a mistake?
No, sorry, I think that was a mistake.
Okay. I'll just go back to, I'm not sure actually whether it's Mr. Law or Mr. Jones on the point that Councillor Holland just raised. Yeah, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for letting me come back in. I think with the parking, obviously it's a highways. Highways think this is a principal town service centre, and that's why we've put in the report that 2 spaces is adequate. And we've actually used that policy on other sites in well, basically very much in this area before. We've agreed to 2 spaces for 4-bedroom units before. So it's not as if we're changing anything now. We're just that we've applied the same parking standards to lots of development in this area. So I don't think we're being unclear about what we've said in our report. We believe it is in a principal town and major service centre. Just wanted to be clear on that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Law, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I really need to stress that it's very important to consider the existing character and pattern of development in the area. You are talking about an area that is characterised, irrespective of the age of the properties. You've got terraced properties with tight formal blocks, and you're talking about referencing density and also overdevelopment of a site. You're looking at a very tight grain of development anyway, so you really need to exercise caution in approaching a reason for refusal on that basis. In terms of neighbourhood plan policies, which, Chairman, you quite rightly reference, policy AE4, draft policy AE4 of the emerging neighbourhood plan. Now that references backland development, but what it does say is it says we'll only resist backland development where it's harmful to the character of the local area. Now, for the reasons I've just mentioned, the character of the local area is one of tight terrace properties, as well as semi-detached properties, formal block structures. I'm failing to see how we could sustain a reason for refusal on grounds of overdevelopment of the site, and it being crammed in as well. It's been carefully designed to respect neighbouring properties in terms of impacts, hence the bungalows at either end to the most affected properties. And in terms of the relationship with Oakfield Close, to the north of the site, the report at page 62 does note that there is a height difference between the proposal. That has been taken into account. There's a height difference of about 800 millimetres, and that's referenced in the 4th paragraph down. The nearest plot there is a bungalow, so there's definitely no sustainable reason for refusal on grounds of impact on existing neighbouring properties. In terms of the proposed properties, yes, front to front, that would reduce down to 17 metres, but with our design guide, that now allows a reduction from those previously cited in the Macclesfield Local Plan Policy DC 38. So we're moving away from those in terms of internal separation standards. I could go on, but I don't want to. I think those are the key points that I wanted to come back on. All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Law, for that advice. I'm not aware that there are any properties on Oakfield Close which would satisfy the description of bungalow. But anyway, I will again go back to members. Anybody else wishing to speak, put a proposal on the table. That's where we are at the moment. Councillor Harewood, please.
I've listened carefully to the discussion. I don't know if I can propose that we accept this application and have better conversations with the people around there for the benefits of developing this land that is overgrown.
I think you've put yourself on mute, Councillor Harewood.
It is no longer what it used to be, and that it will help to solve amicable housing there, and no specific other proposition has been made how this land is to be used. And I think it's a useful way of using this land. I don't think it is overdevelopment. I would like to say that this application passes the planning rules, and I don't know, I'm in Macclesfield, so I don't know if I can propose approval. But if I can, I will.
Well, your location is not relevant to whether you're able to propose or not, Councillor Harewood, so I will take that as a proposal in favour of approval.
Thank you.
Councillor Harewood, is that proposal seconded? Please, Councillor Smitham.
Yes, I would like to second it, please.
Thanks, Councillor Smitham. So that is proposed and seconded for approval. Before we go to a vote, is there anything our officers would like to add at this point?
No, thank you, Chair.
Mr. Jones.
Just on access, is that access, it's an unadopted road, and it's a right of access is something that we can't really determine now. It's just the planning matters we're looking at. It's up for the applicant to make sure he gets a right of access to this site. Just wanted to make that clear that it's something that the applicant will have to sort out to get access to the site. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Jones. So I'll take the vote now by calling each member in order, starting with Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please. Please indicate whether you are for, against or not voting on the proposal of approval.
Not voting.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Dean, please.
Not voting.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Findlow.
Against.
Councillor Ailift Harewood.
For.
Councillor Sally Holland.
Not voting.
Councillor Ian McFarlane.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Brendan Murphy.
For.
Councillor Nick Mannion.
Against, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor James Nicholas.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
Against.
Councillor Leslie Smatham.
For.
And myself, Councillor Craig Brown, against. So I'll just do the numbers on that. 1, 6, 3.
Yeah, and then 1, 2, 3 not voting, 3 abstentions.
So we make that 6 votes against, 3 for, and 3 abstentions. So that proposal to approve is lost. Is anybody prepared to put down a counter proposal?
Yes, I'll propose that.
I think we'll need some reasons, Councillor Findlow, but thank you.
I'm sure our ever helpful officers will put the maximum case forward.
Sorry, through you, Chairman, I do need Councillor Findlow to suggest some reasons, at least, you know, something that the officers can then assist with the detail, but really the mover does need to put forward something.
Yes. Well, access and character are the two, and overdevelopment. I mean, they can be elaborated on by our helpful planners.
Before I go further, Councillor Smatham, did you want to speak on this?
Yes, please. Can I just check on that voting figure, please, that you called out before?
Yes.
Numbers for and against and abstaining.
I've got 6. Sorry, I'll start with the 4s. I've got 3 votes for, 6 votes against, and 3 not voting.
Are we 12 on this committee?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we've had a proposal from Councillor Findlow to refuse on grounds of access, character and overdevelopment. Does that proposal have a seconder, please?
I'll second it. It's Councillor Nicholas.
Councillor Nicholas, thank you. Right, I'll need to go back to our planning officer then at that point, and seek some advice and some help on how we can finesse these reasons for refusal in policy terms.
Okay, Chairman. I really need to be clear about what it's. You can say that there's, you know, a concern about access, but what is that concern? So I need from members, you know, you need to tell me why it's not compliant with local plan policy, which policies it's contrary to. I'm happy to assist, but just saying that, you know, the access proposal isn't acceptable isn't sufficient, doesn't give me anything to work with in terms of formulating a reason for refusal or helping you to formulate a reason for refusal. In terms of character and overdevelopment of the site, obviously I can assist with that one, but please can I just go back to members just so that they can really clarify what it is with the access that isn't acceptable.
Well, Mr. Moore knows policy DC6 a lot better than I do.
I don't really want to do this from the chair, but yeah, perhaps I could just draw attention back to a point that one of the public speakers made about the access to Buckhorn Street being, it was, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was under 5 metres, 4.9. Is that policy compliant to enable two-way traffic to ingress and egress? And is that perhaps something that might be considered.
Mr. Jones can advise on the required width of the access, but as I understand it, is sufficient access width to serve the existing properties that use Buckhorn Street and the proposed properties. What members need to be very careful of is, you will have heard during the discussions on this application that a previous application for 8 dwellings was refused. Now, one of those did include a reason for refusal relating to access, but it wasn't in relation to vehicle use. And so it would be deemed unreasonable to then, in light of what we have now, which isn't materially different, albeit we've got less units, to then introduce a reason for refusal on vehicular access grounds. The previous reason for refusal cited insufficient pedestrian access, but I'd really discourage members from doing that, because there are 2 points of pedestrian access for this site that are proposed. As well as that, in terms of the main access off Buckhorn Street, that's to be a shared surface, so giving priority to pedestrians. So you're gonna really struggle to sustain a reason for refusal at appeal on that basis. If you were to proceed with the access reason for refusal, you need to be careful and define whether it's pedestrian access or vehicular access or both. For the reasons are specified, I would strongly recommend you don't go along the vehicular access route, because we've not raised that as an issue before. That would be deemed to be unreasonable behaviour and will put us at high risk of costs at appeal. So yeah, if you deemed that there was insufficient pedestrian access, you could then determine that it was contrary to saved policy DC6 of the Macclesfield Borough Local Plan, and SE1 and CO1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan Strategy. I would exercise caution about referencing neighbourhood plan policies, given the stage that Alderley Edge neighbourhood plan is at. It's only in its draft stage. It's not been the subject of any kind of scrutiny at examination, and so the weight that we can afford to it is limited at this stage.
I've got 3 members wanting to come back in, and then I'd like to ask a further point of clarification as well. So firstly, Councillor Mannion, then Councillor Dean, then Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, Mr. Law partially answered the question I was going to raise. What were the reasons why the previous application was refused? You've explained the access one, Rob. What were there any other grounds in which the refusal of the 6th of November 2018 were made? Because if so, those grounds might still be valid.
I'll come back to Mr. Law in a moment. Councillor Dean, please.
Thank you, Chair. The question I wanted to ask Mr. Law is, if this planning application is approved and subsequently the people building the houses cannot get permission for that second pedestrian pathway, does the planning permission lapse, or does it still count as being approved, even if that second pathway, because of civil court reasons, is not allowed? Or does this application, because it's got that access in, if they don't get that access, is the application then void, even if it's approved?
And finally, Councillor Murphy, although your hand's gone down again, so I'm not sure whether you want to speak or it's been addressed already.
Yes, I would like to speak, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
Over to you.
As I understand it, the other road is also a moot point about who it belongs to and the right of access over it. And I would have thought we very much need a bit of legal advice on that. I would assume that you could get the planning permission for the developments, But if the owner of that land doesn't have the right of any right of access, or to bring cars or vehicles or even pedestrian access over those other two routes, then that's that landowner's problem. It's not our problem. We can give a planning permission, but if they don't have the means of implementing their permission, I mean, I understand that I could seek a planning permission for your back garden. And if they decided, the council decided it was a good idea, the fact that you wouldn't let me to have it built on in your garden would be the end of the story. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Murphy. Yeah, I do think this is it's a challenging point, isn't it? Because land ownership isn't a planning matter, but we are being asked to consider 2 points of access where the right of ownership isn't a given. So I'll come back to our officers on that. The question that I had was Mr. Law mentioned previously policy DC6 of the Macclesfield Borough Local Plan, but then went on to reference, I think, 2 further ones that we might apply, but I didn't make a note of them. So if you could repeat that, please.
I've got those. Sorry, Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll deal with in order. Councillor Mannion, in terms of the reasons for refusal previously, we had 4. The first one was in relation to the scale, layout and landscaping of the proposal. Was deemed to have an overbearing impact on the character and appearance of the area. Then the second reason for refusal was impact on residential amenity. So it was deemed that there was an unsatisfactory relationship with properties on Oakfield Road and Oakfield Close. Bear in mind we were dealing with 8 3-storey properties at that point, so quite an increase in scale compared to what's proposed before members today. Third reason for refusal was insufficient pedestrian access for the occupiers of the development, as well as parking spaces being inadequate in terms of size. That's not, in terms of parking spaces being inadequate in size, that's not an issue for these proposals. And then the fourth reason for refusal was insufficient information in relation to flood risk, but that's been addressed, and we've got no objection from the council's flood risk manager, so that wouldn't sustain a reason for refusal on its own. Councillor Dean, just in terms of your point about sort of a civil lapse in the permission because of the civil rights. If, let's face it, if we were granting planning permission for this, and for whatever reason the developer couldn't secure the pedestrian access, the second access which is just for pedestrians, in honesty, that, in my view, wouldn't sustain a reason for refusal on the basis that there is still satisfactory pedestrian access along Buckhorn Street. But in terms of moving on to sort of the civil issue, we can't get involved in that, as Councillor Murphy mentioned. We could grant planning permission, and if the developer can't get permission of the respective landowners, then they can't build it out, they can't they can't implement it, but that's a civil matter. And in terms of Councillor Brown, Chairman, in terms of your query on policies, I know Sarah has taken a note of those, but I referenced SE1 in the Cheshire East Local Plan and CO1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan also. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I did make a reference to CO1 when I spoke earlier on, and I've forgotten what it was that it related to. It was about the walking and improving pedestrian facilities, wasn't it? So there's an argument or a question as to whether this proposal before us actually does that. I just wonder whether it's worth just coming back, commenting on the what you said, Mr. Law, about the previous application being refused on grounds of amenity of neighbours, and given that we've had not necessarily an objection but a concern raised by our own internal landscape character consultee, that the properties will be too close to the northwest boundary to allow adequate landscaping. Presumably that would include boundary treatment, boundary protection as well. So possibly that's a further reason that could be added. And then finally, I suppose I come back to parking and the question of, as I said, if we're a local service centre, the policy requirement is 3 spaces per 4-bedroom dwelling. And I am aware that we've, within the last 12 months, I think, refused an application number 24 Elm Crescent, based on them not being able to show 3 on-site spaces for a 4-bedroom extension. And that was simply an extension to an existing property, not a new build as this would be. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do think we should get some proper legal advice on that, because you're not talking about the landscaping issue. Well, if I understood what you were trying to get across was the appearance issue. And I think that's a matter of personal judgment. And there are some people who perhaps don't want a house with big gardens. I mean, sometimes I wonder whether I should have ever had a house with a garden. There's so much work in it. So I can't see that, that is a proper planning refusal. But it's a legal point there. It's a bit similar to the one about if you don't own the access to the if you don't have ownership of the road of access into the site, well, it's tough if the owner of that access won't give it to you. So it's the same problem of a legal situation.
Thanks, Councillor Murphy. For speaking for myself, I'd actually interpreted it as leaving insufficient external amenity space to allow for adequate screening to be planted, thereby delivering a negative impact on the amenity of neighbouring property owners. But I may be wrong in my interpretation of that.
Well, I think you're pushing your luck with that one.
Thanks for that observation. Perhaps I could come back again to our planning officer or even our legal officer for clarity on that point.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of, I've already explained in terms of the that separation, you're talking about plot 3 in the northern corner of the site, which backs on to number 10 and 11 Oldfield Close. The landscape officer's comments were on a previous iteration of this scheme, where the proposal at plot 3 was a larger dwelling and it was harder up to the boundary. Her concern was not being able to secure appropriate soft landscaping along that boundary. We've now got a smaller unit, a bungalow, and it's shifted away from that boundary. So there is scope as part of the landscaping condition, which is recommended, to secure appropriate soft landscaping on that boundary. It wasn't for purposes of screening the site from neighbouring residential properties.
Thank you for that clarity, Mr. Law. And on the question of the parking standards,
we'll come back.
Can Mr. Jones come back on that?
Chair, I think I've already explained what I understand. What that you may believe that there's going to be a need for 3 spaces per property, but we've always judged applications in this area as being within Alderley Edge, so I can't see why we would change that view now. I think we've dealt with other applications. I know you've mentioned one, which was an extension. We asked for 3 spaces, but generally applications in this area for 4-bedroom units, we've asked for 2 spaces, Chair.
That's okay. I think it was more a question as to whether the inclusion of that as a reason for refusal would be, in your professional opinion, defendable. That was all.
Well, that's up to members, Chair, to decide that. I mean, it wouldn't be, I think it would be very difficult, given what we've said as officers, to defend it. But, you know, if members make decisions on these things, and it will be down to members. And just on access, I might as well talk about access now. Before this application came to committee, we went through, because we're very aware of the objections from residents on this application, and it's taken probably 2 years to get this application to committee. We went through, from a highway point of view, this application with a fine-tooth comb, and if there was any reasons that we could have found to raise issues with this application, we would have done so. So in terms of the access itself, we need a 4.8 metre access. There's nothing wrong with having a shared surface access to serve 6 properties and a few garages. And these off-site works have dealt with the visibility issues. And we've heard from Mr. Law about the turning circles and the refuse collection. So we've been through this application in great depth, and we're struggling to come up with a reason for refusal. So I just want to make that clear that, you know, we are struggling to make reasonable access, reasonable for refusal and access on this. So, you know, it's difficult to us to support if members decide to go with access, a reason for refusal. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Jones. I'd like to move to the vote, but I can see I'll just take Councillor Harewood's comment, and then I'll take a vote on this, because I think we need to move on. Councillor Harewood. Councillor Harewood, you've lowered your hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much for letting me speak again. In the historic past, there must have been access to these allotments and to and fro. So why this access becomes more when the allotments are no longer in use, and 6 houses and 2 bungalows want to use what was always there. I personally find it difficult that this unused piece of land, which cannot revert to a lot, which has no intention to revert to what it used to be, in fact, I find it an improvement to what it used to be. And that access must have been there to suggest that the neighbors will refuse. I don't know that each neighbor has said they will reject this or challenge it. I don't know if they actually said that. I'm told by one speaker they heard that the neighbors will refuse. I don't know if that's a fact, but I think it's an improvement to an overgrown piece of land that previously had access, and I do support the application as I did before. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. I think Mrs. Fillam would like to come in, and then I'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chairman. It was really just to clarify, I've been listening, but I'm really unclear, and I know there's a recommendation, or there's been a move for refusal. My original note has got down that the recommendation was on access, character and overdevelopment. And I'm not in, and since then the planning officer and the highways officer have come back on and made comments in relation to those suggested reasons for refusal, and I'm just really unclear now in terms of what the proposal is, where it stands at the moment, bearing in mind the comments that have been made by both those 2 officers. So if it's possible, please, could the mover and or the seconder please just clarify in terms of exactly what that recommendation is. Sorry, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Fillam. I'll go back to them in a moment, but I've made a note of the 3 things that you've mentioned, contrary to policy DC6 of the Macclesfield Borough Plan Safe policy, and then policies SE1 and CO1 of Cheshire East Local Plan Strategy.
So in terms of access, is it the physical access, or is it, so is it the width? Because Mr. Jones has been really clear in terms of the physical access is wide enough? Is it the parking standards, or is it the access?
I'll need to go back to the proposer and seconder for that clarity. Councillor Finlay.
Pedestrians. I mean, it's a question of wearing members down, isn't it?
No.
By a process of attrition. But,
no, Councillor Finlow, I'm just trying to completely understand what the reasons are, because, as I say, I've listened, but I am slightly confused in terms of where exactly it is. So it's the pedestrian access, not the vehicular access.
We were advised that the two were distinct, vehicle access and pedestrian access.
Okay.
I mean, there is, Chairman, a subjective aspect and perspective to all this. It isn't just clear cut one way or the other way. There is a degree of latitude in interpreting and applying what these policies mean, and that's the raison d'etre of why we have elected members. Otherwise, what's the point of us being here? I get quite confused and upset about this sometimes. So I understand there's a strong case from an officer perspective, which has been iterated and reiterated to us, and perfectly properly so. I wouldn't expect an officer to do anything other than support the report they'd already crafted themselves. That's quite understandable and entirely acceptable. But there is a degree of latitude and a degree of subjectivity in interpreting these rules and these policies. And we're here to exercise that. We may be wrong.
Chairman,
Thank you, Councillor Finlow. I was going to go to Councillor Nicholas just to ask whether he had anything to add, and then I'll come back to you, Mrs. Folan. Yeah.
Super.
Councillor Nicholas, is there anything you wish to add to further to what Councillor Finlow has said?
I don't think so. No, I'm afraid not.
Right, Mrs. Folan, then back with you.
Sorry, Chairman, it was just purely to say that we need to properly understand exactly members' views in order to be able to properly present them should any appeal be made. So that's why I'm trying to be very, very clear. Thank you.
I quite accept that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, is it possible to say, bearing in mind what Councillor Finlow has just said, and I think he's obviously right about that, otherwise we wouldn't need a committee if everything was black and white, that we, the councillors on this committee, do not feel that the shared pedestrian and vehicle access in both directions, down Buckhole Lane or whatever it's called, is adequate. Now that's the access one. We do not feel it's adequate and safe. And secondly, on the amenity, we do not believe that the way the houses are positioned on the site is acceptable amenity-wise to the existing buildings. I think, is it Oldfield Lane behind?
Oakfield Close.
Oakfield Close. So we do not believe that the amenity of those properties is acceptably impacted. And the third one was overdevelopment, which I'm sure somebody can put some phrases around that.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Murphy.
Well, yeah, and when it goes to the appeal, and all those people in that other road that we're assuming don't like what's being built, they all turn up for the inquiry and say, yeah, we would love to have seen that housing there. It's just, I can't understand how we can't recognise that we can only have reasons which are reasonable legally. And as I understand it, that what you've said about the access issue, about this other one about how it's going to be a nuisance to other people or it's unfair on other people, I just cannot see how he could stand that up. But I think I'd rather go straight to a vote now. We lost it last time and we'll lose it again, and then leave it to the officers to have the struggle of presenting, and the taxpayers are paying for the cost of an appeal that will inevitably come about.
Thank you. Mr. Law, please, and then agree with Councillor Murphy, and certainly in respect of the need to go to the vote.
Right, okay. It just need to be clear in terms of understanding exactly what the harm is from the pedestrian access and how it's insufficient. Also, Councillor Dean's also mentioned residential amenity, but I've explained that you really would struggle to sustain a reason for refusal on that basis. As I understood it, the only thing The only issues on the table were in relation to the access and character and overdevelopment. So officers need to understand that. The access, sorry to be blunt, you just will not win that appeal. And sorry to go on about it, but you need to be very careful, because we are opening ourselves up to cost, and this is going to constitute unreasonable behaviour, because we've not said that this is an issue previously. We need to be clear what is wrong with the pedestrian access. Most sites of this size are only accessed with one point of pedestrian access. This proposes 2 for a site with 6 dwellings. So if there's an argument that the shared surface isn't appropriate for the use of vehicles and pedestrians, that's circumvented by the fact that there's a totally separate pedestrian access at the other end of the site. Added to that flies in the face of what we're trying to achieve as an authority in terms of design, where we're promoting, in smaller developments, as well as the larger developments in appropriate areas, the use of shared surface space to give pedestrians priority. So I'm really, really struggling to see where members are coming from here in terms of the access reason for refusal. You are really going to struggle at appeal, and I'm not going to hammer the point anymore. That I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we have a named vote now, please? And can we attach to that vote that those people who voted for it bear the cost if it goes to appeal and we lose it?
I'm not sure we can do that, Councillor Murphy.
Or we could do the first bit, and that's have a named vote.
Every vote in these virtual meetings is by necessity a named vote anyway, because we have to do the roll call. Councillor Nicholas.
Yeah, not related to what Councillor Murphy just said, but perhaps I should be withdrawing my my second. I think I don't think we can. I think officers are right. I don't think we can sustain it. So maybe I will have to withdraw my support for refusal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nicholas. Mrs. Baxter wants to come in.
Sorry, Chairman, I was just going to say I'm happy to include within the minutes a named vote if that's what Councillor Murphy was requesting. We have done that on previous occasions.
Well, we no longer have a proposal on the table because we've got a proposal, but it's not now seconded. I do feel it will be inappropriate for me as chair to second it. Does it have a seconder, or is the proposal going to fall? Well, we do need to make a decision one way or another.
Well, Mr. Chairman, may I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation?
We have already voted on that proposal.
You haven't voted.
We have.
Oh. I've been asleep.
In the interest of us getting through a vote, is anybody prepared to second the proposal that Councillor Findlow has made? Councillor Smetham, please.
Sorry, could you read out the proposal that Councillor Findlow made? Was it for approval or what?
No, we've already taken a vote on approval, which was lost, and then Councillor Findlow has moved refusal on grounds of access, character and overdevelopment, contrary to policies DC6 of the Macclesfield Borough Save Local Plan, policy SE1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan and policy CO1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan. Mrs. Folan.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to try to assist, in terms of Councillor Murphy moving approval, yes, we have already had a vote on the officer's report for approval as it currently stands. If we were to make an amendment to one of the conditions, then that would be a new recommendations. So, for example, it could be moved that the removal of permitted development rights for extensions and outbuildings could be extended to potentially extend the removal of permitted development rights. And as such, that would be a different motion, just to try to assist in terms of moving things forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Folland. In that case, I've really been left with no other option than to second Councillor Finlow's proposal, which I really didn't want to do as chair. But as in the interest of moving this forward and us getting to a vote, and hopefully moving on with the agenda, I need to do that. So it has been proposed by Councillor Finlow and seconded by myself, the chair, for refusal. So for the reasons that I've just gone through. So I will now take the vote on it, please, members, starting with Councillor. So please indicate whether you are for.
Excuse me, Chair. What are we voting on now?
We are currently about to vote on a refusal as proposed by Councillor Finlow, seconded myself, for the reason.
That's fine.
So we're voting on the proposal of refusal. Sorry, Mr. Law.
Sorry, I get the reason for refusal that you're proceeding with on the basis of access, but what character and overdevelopment of the site? You've not referenced how you wish that reason for refusal to be articulated.
Attrition again.
Councillor Finlow.
No, I mean, this is getting a bit silly, isn't it, Chairman? It's attrition. We've been through it all. I'm a bit worried about the way in which we're proceeding.
Yeah, I really do feel that we need to take the vote on this. We've been through this several times now, and I've articulated what the reasons are and the policies that Councillor Finlow and I believe the proposal is not compliant with. Councillor Smatham.
It's not possible to go straight to a discussion on the condition that was suggested by the officer.
Yeah, well, it is, but it's now been proposed and seconded for refusal, so we need to take that vote.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Law, sorry, I wasn't sure whether that was a leg to stand or not.
It's back again.
I'm not, and you may think I'm being obstructive, but I'm not here. I'm trying to help in terms of its officers that will have to defend this at appeal. So in terms of articulating the first reason for refusal regarding access, you've quite rightly referenced the relevant policies. I was just a bit concerned you're about to move into a vote on a proposal where we don't know what the reason for refusal is in terms of character and overdevelopment of the site. Which policies is it that you're going to be referencing? Is it, I mean, I can help in terms of, if you so wish, explain which the relevant policies are. So basically you'd be saying that there would be an overdevelopment of the site, which would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the area, contrary to policies SE1, SD2 of the Cheshire East Local Plan, and saved policy DC41 of the Macclesfield Borough Local Plan. That would be a reason for refusal that you could work with, and would be a reason for refusal that officers could work with in the event of an appeal. That is the point that I'm trying to make.
Well, thank you for making it. I quite accept that. Thank you.
As a seconder, ditto.
Can I just check, Chairman, we're taking it named vote, and the named vote will be included within the minutes?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So it's proposed and seconded for refusal for the reasons given, contrary to policy DC6, the Macclesfield Borough Local Plan, SE1, SD2, CO1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan, and finally DC41, Save Policy of the Macclesfield Borough Local Plan. I'd like to move to the vote. Please indicate for, against or not voting on the proposal to refuse. Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Dean.
Not voting, Chair.
Councillor Paul Findlow.
For refusal.
Councillor Ailiff Towerwood.
Against refusal.
Councillor Sally Holland.
Not voting, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ian McFarlane.
Not voting, Chair.
Councillor Brendan Murphy.
Against.
Councillor Nick Mannion.
Against.
Councillor James Nicholas.
Not voting.
Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Leslie Smatham.
Against.
And Councillor Craig Brown for.
Four against.
For not voting.
Yeah, for not voting.
Right, so if I can report that back to the meeting, it's 4 votes for refusal, 4 votes against and 4 not voting, which, thank you colleagues, means it goes back to the chair's casting vote. So I'm going to vote again for refusal. Thank you, members. Do members need a short break, or shall we move on to the next item? If you feel we would like to take a break, please raise your hand.
Cheers.
Yeah, okay. I'm taking a sense of the meeting that people would like a break. Should we take a 15 minutes break and reconvene at 25 to 4? Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Fucking shit. Right. She's not coming this morning.
Okay, good afternoon again, members. We're now ready to reconvene. I'm really sorry, but we will need to again do the roll call just to check that everybody's in the meeting and is able to be heard. So just quickly, Councillor Braithwaite.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dean has left. So Councillor Findlow.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Harewood.
Present here, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane.
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Murphy.
Just about.
Councillor Mannion. Councillor Mannion has left. Apologies. Councillor Nicholas.
Still here.
Councillor Puddicombe.
Me too.
And finally, Councillor Smother.
Present, yes.
Thank you, everybody. So we'll now move on to our next application, which is item number 8, application 20/0554M for the erection of a new detached dwelling adjacent to the existing property of Cornercroft on Green Lane, Alderley Edge, and the applicants are Mr. and Mrs. Kaminski. I'd now like to invite our planning officer, Robert Law, to present this application.
Ben.
He's not in there.
Right, can you see that okay, Chairman?
Thank you. Yes, we are able to see the slide.
I will start. Members, we're still in Alderley Edge, so we're actually towards the southwest of Alderley Edge, right on the periphery. Here we have the side garden area of a property known as Cornercroft, which is just within the predominantly residential area. There is Greenbelt adjacent on the opposite side of the road here. So just in terms of context, you can see the site edged in red. The site's accessed off another unadopted road called Green Lane, which provides access to a number of existing residential properties. In terms of the site itself, this is a photograph taken from the driveway of the existing property, Cornercroft, which you see here. This is the site in the foreground with a neighbouring property just on the opposite side of the boundary, the hedgerow there. This moves further into the site, so this is the plot itself. It would take its own vehicular access out here, roughly where those goalposts are. And this again is looking towards a neighbouring property here, which is shown in more detail on this slide. That's number 10 Blackwater Lane, which is offset, and as you can note, already has some high sill level windows. So turning back around, this is looking back within the plot back towards the side elevation of the applicant's property, Cornercroft. And then again, stood in the plot, this is the northwest corner of 6 Blackwater Lane, which is another neighbouring property to the site, just to the back of it. So just for context, the 2 properties, neighbouring properties I've just shown you, that is number 10 Blackwater, and this is number 6 Blackwater. And what you've got before you members today is a proposal to subdivide the plot and provide a new detached residential property to the side of Cornercroft with its own access off Green Lane here. In terms of appearance, Cornercroft here, this is just a street scene. This is the proposed appearance of the new unit. You can see the access in here towards the left-hand side of the plot with a hedgerow retained at the front, except for the access. And then in terms of the elevations, sorry they're so dark, but you get an idea of what the proposal looked like. So the front elevation facing the road, you've got various gables which kind of tie in with the features found on the neighbouring properties, particularly Cornercroft. Rear elevation here, And then the side elevation facing those neighbouring properties I've just shown you, there is a forward projection which would serve as a garage, which would be side on to the front. And then this obviously shows the floor plans for the proposals. There's just important to note the side elevation facing those neighbouring properties hasn't got any principal windows to avoid any direct overlooking. And this plan just demonstrates the separation distances with those two neighbouring properties. As you can see, given the offset angle of the proposal to number 10 here, sorry, number 6 here, 15.6 metres is sufficient to ensure no direct overlooking because they're offset from one another. And here, in terms of the relationship, there are no principal windows that will be affected in number 10. There's a separation of about 16 metres just over there. So the application, it's acceptable in principle, being within a predominantly residential area. It's a relatively sustainable location, and the design is in line with those properties found in the vicinity. Given the offset nature and the separation distances, there's an acceptable amenity impact, and the proposal is acceptable in highways terms also. On that basis, it's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Law. We have some public speakers on this item, so I would now like to invite the first of those, Parish Councillor Miles Garbett, who is representing Alderley Edge Parish Council. Councillor Garbett, would you like to turn on your camera and microphone and prepare to address the committee?
Hi, good afternoon.
5 minutes, begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon. Again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Parish Council on this application. Alderley Edge Parish Council has a number of issues with this proposal. The Alderley Edge Neighbourhood Plan's emerging policies, AE4, is resistive to backland and infill development. This should be borne into consideration along with Cheshire East policies for this form of development. Current housing supply requirements for Cheshire East are being met. Despite amendment, the submitted applications plans did not observe the existing building line with the adjoining garage and habitable space above, which is set at 90 degrees to the rest of the house and being close to the road. I'd also state that this is speculative overdevelopment. The mass and density of the proposed dwelling is inappropriate. Proposal will more than double the built area of Cornercroft, increasing density disproportionately to other properties in the immediate area. With the wedge shape of the plot itself, angle and positioning of the proposed development, it will dominate aspects of properties to its rear, particularly Little Meadows and Ashwater. Properties there would lose open aspect previously to trees and gardens to be replaced with clear sight of the new dwelling and mutual overlooking. With the proximity and the very marginal offset angle, there would be severe concerns around privity to these rear properties in question. These houses are equivalent to rear facing, and so the distancing requirements should be closely reviewed, probably more in the region of minimum of 21 metres. Distances stated between habitable windows are barely in excess of the agreed minimal planning guidance, but more importantly, less than all other houses in the immediate built area as well. The reference screening is overstated as it is seasonal at best, and so the close proximity of the proposed new dwellings would allow future occupiers direct views into habitable rooms and into the garden, giving loss of amenity and privacy. That's what we have. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Councillor Garbutt. Are there any questions from members of the committee, please? It would appear there are no questions on this, so thank you, Councillor Garbutt. If I could now ask you to turn off your camera and microphone again, and I'll invite the next speaker. So I'd now like to call upon Mr. Alan Corinaldi-Knott, who is representing an objector, to switch on your camera and microphone, and you have 3 minutes speaking time. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking today on behalf of the occupiers of Little Meadows to the rear of the development proposal, as well as adjoining neighbours. Our clients don't object to the general principle of development, but object to the overall scale and massing of the proposed dwelling and loss of privacy that would result. Paragraph 70 of the MPPF states that local planning authorities should set out policies to resist inappropriate development of residential gardens where development would cause harm to the local area. In this case, the Council has an adopted local plan strategy and design guide, as well as policies on garden development within the emerging Part 2 local plan and the emerging Alderley Edge neighbourhood plan. These adopted and emerging policies set out that development should not result in a loss of openness, should not unacceptably increase the density of built form, should provide adequate screening to protect residential amenity and privacy of neighbouring occupiers, should be equal to or subordinate in scale to the surrounding buildings, and should not result in loss of sunlight and daylight, and should not have an overbearing or dominating effect. After reviewing the plans against these policies, the irregular shape of the plot in this location and the orientation of the proposed dwelling means that a number of first floor windows of the proposed dwelling directly overlook our client's rear garden patio area and face into habitable room windows, including bedrooms, with some of these windows falling well below the 25-metre space standard. Furthermore, the height, scale and mass of the proposed dwelling and its proximity to our client's property and their neighbour's property will be dominant and overbearing. Despite an entirely reasonable request to the case officer in writing by our client to visit their garden to assess the potential impact of the proposal, the case officer has failed to do so. Therefore, members should give no weight to the officer's conclusions, as we do not believe that the impact can be properly considered without a site visit. As mentioned previously, the client is not against the general principle of development. However, the proposed dwelling would be overly dominant and would be detrimental to our client's privacy and amenity. If the scheme was revised to something smaller with less bulk and mass and with better orientation from the rear garden boundary, then our client may be in a position to reconsider their objection. We should also point out that the Council has a 5-year housing land supply, so there's no urgency to grant planning permission in the absence of good design and layout. We therefore respectfully request that members refuse to grant planning permission today, instruct officers to undertake a site visit to our client's property and invite the applicant to redesign the proposed dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members, please, to Mr. Coronel-Dinot? Yes, Councillor Harewood, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you say how large this house will be to the surrounding houses, as you said about scale? Is it bigger than the houses around it? And what is the distance, as far as you know, to the next house? Because I think the picture looked at a large hedge. What is the distance to these rooms that you talk about? Do you know? Thank you.
The first floor window to our clients, but it's marked on the plan that the case officer showed earlier, and it suggests 17.2 metres between the bedrooms. But obviously, as well, our client has a rear patio area in their garden, and given the sort of proximity between the two, where the proposed dwelling is going, and they're quite close to the boundary, so we're obviously going to, there's going to be quite a lot of overlooking there, and we're also sort of referring in terms of scale to the height. Because it's quite a large, bulky dwelling compared to sort of what does exist. So that's all we're saying.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. How tall are the trees between the development site and your client's site? Thank you.
I'm not sure how tall the trees are. I don't have that information to hand, but there's it's a mixture of hedge and trees, and obviously deciduous trees as well. So they do lose their leaf in autumn and winter. So whilst there may be some screening during the summer, that's not always the case throughout the whole year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, members? Councillor Harewood again, please.
Question was not answered according to the relation to the size of these other houses around it, scale and height. How bigger is it than the other houses surrounding it?
Well, there's a mixture of sizes of dwellings in this location. I mean, it's certainly bigger than the house within the existing plot, from what we can see, and it's certainly bigger than some of the neighbouring dwellings as well. But we do accept there is a mixture of size properties in the area.
Thank you. Any further questions, members? No. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Corinaldi-Knott. If you could now turn off your camera and microphone, and I will invite the next speaker to address the committee, which is Mrs. Kath Ludlam, who is the agent for the applicant. Good afternoon, Mrs. Ludlam. You have 3 minutes, and there may be questions from members.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. The applicant, who is not a property developer, lives at Cornercroft with his young family and wants to build a new house for his parents. This is by far the largest plot in the vicinity and can be readily subdivided to form 2 plots. To be quite clear, this is part of the side garden to Cornercroft and has a frontage to Green Lane. It is not rear garden or backland development in planning law, and Alderley Edge Parish Council are incorrect to state this is contrary to Neighbourhood Plan Policy AE4, which refers specifically to rear gardens and backland development. The correct policy is AE1 Alderley Edge Development Strategy, which supports small-scale residential development within the settlement boundaries, as stated in the committee report. The principle of infill development is acceptable, as indicated by previous planning permission for a detached dwelling on this site in 2000, which was not implemented. The application was submitted in February, and following receipt of comments from 3 neighbouring residents and the parish council, was amended to address their concerns by reducing the scale of the dwelling and increasing the setback from Green Lane. The amended plans were subject to reconsultation, and only one of the original objectors from Little Meadows, number 6 to the rear, submitted any comments, and they have since moved away and the property is empty. Little Meadows is a large 5-bedroom detached house which replaced a dilapidated bungalow in 2005. In response to the specific points raised, I would comment that, in respect of overdevelopment, the ratio of plots to building sizes varies within the triangle of Green Lane, Blackshaw Lane and Chorley Hall Lane between 10% and 23%. The proposal on the remaining plot for Cornercroft will both have a plot ratio within the range of the vicinity, which is notably less than that of 23% at Little Meadows, the objector's property. The garden size is comparable to others in the vicinity. As regards to the impact on the amenity of Little Meadows, the report clearly states this has been clearly considered. The boundaries are well screened with mature evergreen planting and a beech hedge which is in leaf all year, and the proposed dwelling is sited to the northwest and at an angle, and further from the boundaries than Little Meadows and Ashwater House. At the nearest point, Little Meadows is 4.5 metres from the boundary, and this proposal would be 9 metres. All privacy distances in Local Plan Policy DC 38 and the Cheshire East Design Guide are met, including at ground floor level. Little Meadows was designed specifically to have no private habitable room windows directly facing this site. Otherwise, it would not have been allowed to be built so close to the boundary. In terms of massing and overbearing, the proposed dwelling has a footprint.
That's your 3 minutes up, but there may be questions from members. Members, anybody wishing to ask a question of the agent? Councillor Smetham, please.
Sorry, apologies, here we go. Can I ask you about the massing and size that you were talking about just as you finished?
Yes. Oh, certainly. The context of assessing this is taken to be the triangle of land which is shown on the location plan. The footprint is less than Little Meadows. Little Meadows is 903 square metres, we're 757. The height of the dwelling is the same as Cornercroft and shown on the street scenes, and is not higher than neighbouring properties, and the building line on Green Lane is respected. The plot ratio is within the parameters established in the triangle. Massing is a function of footprint, height and design, and all are within the parameters established within this triangle. The design is an arts and crafts style.
I think now you've addressed the question that's been asked. Thank you. I've also got two further questions. Firstly, Councillor McFarlane.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Ludlam. I was looking on the portal, the planning portal, and a resident has put down that a screen of trees has already been removed on the southeast boundary. Can you give some more information on that, please? I'm looking at a plan. I'm wondering what trees these were which have been removed. Thank you.
There were some trees removed which was prior to the photographs being taken and prior to the application being submitted. So what you are assessing on site is still there on site. There is a mature evergreen boundary to the boundary of the plot and Little Meadows. It is evergreen and there are tall trees which are approximately the height of the building. So it is, as the report states, it is well screened and remains well screened.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane, thank you. Councillor Brian Pudicker, please.
Thank you. You mentioned AE4, the rear garden backland development, and you were unhappy about the parish council mentioning that. But could I suggest that's perhaps being a bit pedantic, and the rear garden, side garden, there isn't that much difference. It's still, the principle is still the same, seeking to build on part of your garden.
No, I would respond to you. It's quite clear in planning law. There is a concept of backland, or sometimes called tandem development, and this is also defined in your local plan. The problem with backland or rear development is having to take an access from a frontage passing a house. Now, this does not occur on this site. This is a windfall infill site. It has a clear frontage to Green Lane. In planning law, it is quite clear that policy AE4 does not apply to side gardens or infill plots. It's specifically titled rear gardens and backland development, and this is neither of those. And the planning committee report quite clearly states the policy AE1 is applicable. And I would strongly urge you to consider that it is not tandem or backland development, and AE4 is irrelevant.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pudicker. Any further questions? Nope. In that case, Mrs. Ludlam, if you could now turn off your camera and microphone. Thank you for addressing the committee. Please, please feel free to remain in the meeting and observe the debate. I'll now give our planning officer, Mr. Law, an opportunity to come back in on some of the points that have been raised during the public speaking. And then possibly go to questions from members. Mr. Law.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and keep this brief. In terms of overdevelopment of the site, it isn't. In terms of once this proposal will be brought forward, it would be very similar to the plot ratios of existing properties in the vicinity of the site. In relation to a loss of privacy, it's not considered that there would be any direct overlooking given the way the buildings are orientated and offset from one another. So that is not an issue that would prejudice approval of this application. And then in terms of Councillor Harewood raised a good question of one of the speakers regarding height and scale. If you shift round to Blackwater Lane, there's a couple of quite sizable properties, actually larger than the one that is proposed under this application. So it's not considered that this would appear out of scale or over dominant in the vicinity of the site. In terms of overdevelopment, there wouldn't be a density issue here either. It's really quite respectful of the plot ratios, as I've already mentioned. That is all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Law. Are there any questions then from members back to our planning officer before we move into the debate? Anyone wishing to ask a question, please indicate. No, I'm not seeing anybody indicating. So in that case, we'll move straight into the debate. And again, normally we go to the ward councillor first, which again is me, being an Ilsley Edge. So again, in terms of sort of injecting some balance into this, as the second of the public speakers mentioned, actually, I don't think the principle of development here is disputed at all. It is a large site, and it's large enough to accommodate an appropriate infill development. The question is as to whether what is before us appropriate or otherwise. This is a low density housing area, and it's characterised by large houses sited within large plots. So just to pick up on the point and the question that Councillor Harewood just raised, I don't think the size or the scale of the proposal is particularly different to that which exists in the locality already. The issue is whether the plot size and the ratio of the building to that plot size is appropriate. Otherwise, I think for me the issues on this are clearly residential amenity. We heard from the second speaker comments in terms of separation distances and questioning whether they are perhaps appropriate. Plot density and character, as I've just said, it clearly is something to consider. There are 11 properties in the planning officer showed an image earlier, a triangle with the adjacent and nearby properties in it. There are 11 properties in that triangle. 2 of them have a higher plot build to plot ratio than this proposal, and the other 9 have lower ratios, some of them quite significantly lower. And then the other issue is whether or not this is backland development or not, as again was raised by the agent for the applicant. Green Lane is an unadopted road, so if you were to stand on the nearest public highway, those being either Chorley Hall Lane or Blackshaw Lane, you can only see this property, this proposed dwelling, from behind another dwelling. It's not possible to have a clear, uninterrupted vista from the public highway. So there's a question as to whether that actually means that it is backland development. The third speaker, the agent for the applicant, also brought up the issue of policy DC 28 and the separation distances that are required. What policy DC 38 requires is 25 metres from habitable room to habitable room, and the plans, as were picked up by the second speaker, show that there's a distance of only 15.6 to one of the habitable rooms, that being a master bedroom. So again, there's a question as to whether that's important, and if it is, how important. A couple of other things in the report. There are a couple of conditions, well, there's 3 conditions actually. One condition relating to boundary treatment, but again, there's no detail provided within the report as to what that boundary treatment might be. And secondly, there are 2 conditions that relate to landscaping, but again, there are no details in the report or the plan packs as to what those landscaping treatments might be. So again, the only question I'd ask there is it a problem that we're being asked to make a determination without seeing what those boundary treatments and what those landscaping treatments are going to be? And then finally, a question in terms of, again, plot density, height and massing. It's true, the proposal for this site is for a development of 22% plot density. Some of the properties have a lower density. Some of the properties, there are examples on Blackshaw Lane, which is shown in the plan pack, of properties that only have an 8% plot density. So again, there's just a question as to how this proposal relates to and is congruent with the local area. And the final point was really into, and again, it's as a result of that development in terms of plot density. This proposal's for a 5-bedroomed house, detached property, and clearly the future occupants of that might be expected to be a family. So is there sufficient remaining outdoor amenity space in terms of a private garden for a large family to enjoy? I'll say no more at this point and invite comments from fellow members. Councillor Harewood, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
And I thank you for your comments, because I thought, and I'm sitting with for to be asked again or to be corrected. Backland development, as far as I know, is that the house will have an access from where it is onto an exit. It does not say a public road, or does it? I struggle to think how one house will compromise a low density area. It has answered that it is no bigger than the other houses surrounding it. It has answered that there is sufficient space in the garden. It has answered those questions. Amenity has not been compromised. Again, I wish to be corrected if that's wrong, but I can't see a problem with this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Other comments and contributions from members, please. Councillor Smetham, please.
Thank you. Looking at the application, I can see that the size of the property is quite large on one hand, but not the largest in the area. There are several larger. And to balance that out, it looks like a high quality design as per the Alderley Edge neighbourhood plan would wish, and it's sustainably located and so on. So I don't see too many problems with this either. Wait to hear what the others say.
Thank you, Councillor Smetham. Councillor Murphy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully endorse what the previous two speakers have said. I went out of my way to go and see the site and saw the building there. And when you consider its location and what's on the other side of the road, Libris Place, the library, the town council, I can hardly think that you can talk about something being out of character. And the size of the thing is, we've got two houses, two properties for the price of one. And I think we're supposed to be sort of creating more housing, that we need more housing. So I can't see any reason why this application should be refused. It meets a need. Not my taste, by the way. I would never buy a house that look like that they propose to build, but that's life, isn't it? There's a variety of housing, gives people choice, and I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Braithwaite, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It seems to be appropriate infill development to me, without too much of an impact on the surrounding area. I support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Any other members wishing to make a comment or indeed make a proposal? Councillor Puddicombe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would add nothing further to add to my councillor colleagues' comments on that fact that I would agree with all of them. So to move things on, can I suggest that we approve the officer's recommendations?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillors Puddicombe and Murphy. Anybody else wishing to speak before we move to a vote? No, just a final check with our planning officer. Anything we need to be aware of in the terms of the conditions?
No, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in that case, we'll take the vote now by roll call. I will call your name. It's been proposed by Councillor Puddicombe, seconded by Councillor Murphy for approval. Please state whether you are for, against or not voting on the proposal for approval. Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Dean has left. Councillor Paul Findlow.
For.
Councillor Ailift Harwood.
For.
Councillor Sally Holland.
Yes, for, Chair.
Councillor Ian McFarlane.
For, Chair.
Councillor Brendan Murphy.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. For.
Thank you. Councillor Mannion has left. Councillor James Nicholas.
For.
Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
For.
Councillor Leslie Smetham.
For.
And myself, Councillor Craig Brown, not voting. So I'll just do the numbers. 9. Yeah, so that's 9 votes in favour with 1 abstention, 2 abstentions. So that is clearly carried for approval. Thank you very much, members. So we'll now move on to our last application of the agenda, item 9. This is application number 20/3612, demolition of an existing bungalow and construction of 1 detached and a pair of semi-detached dwellings at Fernley, Stanley Road, Knutsford, and the applicant is a Phil Thewlis on behalf of PLT Properties Limited. So could I now invite our Planning Officer Paul Wakefield to present this application? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, I'm going to try and share my screen once again and hope that it works this time. Where's it gone? No.
If you struggle, Mrs. Baxter has the presentation and I'll ask her to do a screen share instead.
Yeah, if you could, please, and I'll talk through it as we go. And
yeah, I'll try, Chairman, but I'm also having some issues with mine as well, so I'll have to go a different way than I would normally go and see if this works.
Yeah, it has come up.
Has that come up? I'm not sure what that is there. Right. Is that it there? There's some random number appeared on the front of that. I don't know what that is.
That does appear to be working with the
Right.
exception of the title slide, so I think we can proceed.
okay. Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, this is Fernley on Stanley Road in Knutsford. It's probably a familiar site to most members, as it was a previous scheme was considered back in June at the Planning Committee then, June of this year. So only, what, 4 or 5 months ago, where a similar application for 3 dwellings was refused, and that application, as set out in the report, is currently the subject of an appeal. Now, the applicant sought to address the reasons for refusal, or the reason for refusal, by making amendments to the scheme, which we can go through now. But as you can see, Fernley, it's on Stanley Road, which is just up from the Toft Road junction, very close to the town centre. You probably couldn't get a more sustainable location, with an access road to the south of the site that leads down to an industrial estate and residential properties surrounding it on other sides. And next slide, Sarah, please. And just to put it in a bit wider context, you can see the application site, and then just to the north is the main sort of part of the town centre. As I say, very close to the application site at the train station as well, in walking distance. And you can see the railway line as well. So you've got to the south east, we've got the access road, then a row of vegetation, and then the railway line as well. And Booth Supermarket is the sort of larger structure that's located to the northwest of the site on the opposite side of the road. Next slide, Sarah, please. So a few photographs of the application site as it currently stands. So this is Fernley, existing detached bungalow spread across the site, and an existing outbuilding, and you can see the boundary treatments quite substantial as they currently exist. Next slide, please. Then again, looking at the site from St John's Road, which is the road just around the corner, and that's the nearest neighbour, which is at Tynedale, which is an existing bungalow. So that sits on St John's Road, and then you can just see the gable end of the existing bungalow within the application site with the cream render in the background. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then again, just looking at Tynedale again, but just showing the boundary treatment that extends around the corner from Stanley Road, but surrounds the application site as well. Next slide. Next slide, yeah. Thanks, Sarah. So this is St John's Road, just a view looking from the junction with Stanley Road, with the application site on the left-hand side. So that the application site, if you like, it sits on that junction, and so it's quite a prominent position, as we'll probably see later in the photographs as well. Next slide, please, Sarah. So there we go. Again, looking the other way up St John's Road towards the application site, which just sits on the corner beyond the last bungalow that we can see, and then you can see Libris Place, which are the properties opposite on Stanley Road, which face towards the application site as well. Next slide, please, Sarah. And again, the access road. So this is the other side from the access road. So as you come from the Toft Road junction along Stanley Road, just before you get to the application site itself, is the turning for the Stanley Road Industrial Estate, and this is the road that leads down to that. And then there's a grassed bank before you get to the brick wall, which serves as the boundary for the application site. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then again, just a view along Stanley Road, which shows Libris Place, which, as I said before, is the development that faces towards the application site. Relatively recent, but has been there for some time as well, I suppose. But does have a relatively contemporary appearance to it with its sort of flat roof projections. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this is taken as you sort of approach from the Stanley Road Toft Road junction, the access road to the industrial estate on the left-hand side, and you can see the existing detached garage that has accommodation in the roof space within the application site, facing towards that junction. So as you can see, it's on quite a prominent plot, being surrounded by I suppose 3 roads really on what is effectively triangular shaped plot. And again, you can just see the boundary treatments along that Stanley Road frontage as well, that existing brick wall. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this is proposed site plan. As previously proposed, there are still 3 dwellings, a pair of semi-detached and a single detached dwelling. So the single detached one is that situated on the left of the plan there, and the 2 semis over on the right. There have been slight alterations, which I think can just go to the next slide, please. Sarah. Yeah. So this shows the footprint, the changing footprint, if you like, from the previously proposed scheme, which is the red dotted line, to that which is currently proposed. The general form and design of the dwellings remains very similar to what was previously proposed. It's more, the amendments have come forward more as alterations to its scale and positioning, as you can see from this plan, which I think in terms of the semi-detached properties, which are just to the north of where it says access road, you can see that they've been moved quite substantially away from that quite prominent prominent corner as you approach from Toft Road. On the right hand side there, you can see the gap between the proposed black line and the red line dotted on the right hand side. So that's how much it's been moved over from the previous proposal, and then the footprint slightly changed as well. It's been narrowed at its peripheries, if you like, and then the two features that project forwards have been slightly enlarged, all in an attempt to sort of reduce the visual impact, if you like, of the proposal. And similarly with the detached dwelling, the change is probably not quite as pronounced, but I suppose the two-story feature, it'll be more evident in the elevations as we look at those in a moment. But the two-story feature which sits on that prominent Stanley Road, St John's Road corner has been narrowed down slightly, again in an attempt to reduce its overall massing and visual impact from public vantage points. Next slide, please, Sarah. So these are the elevations of plots 2 and 3, which are the pair of semis. So we have plot 2, sorry, is the one that faces towards, has its flank elevation facing towards the nearest neighbour at Tynedale. There were slight amendments made to the plans to provide the green screens to the balconies to ensure that to protect privacy and enclose them, those particular areas, and similarly obscurely glaze the windows on that elevation. So if you look, we're looking at the bottom right picture, the bottom right elevation, where it's the flank elevation plot 2, those grey windows or the grey openings, the 4 openings at first and second floor level, are all proposed to be obscurely glazed, and it will have this green screen to protect privacy, or to avoid overlooking and protect privacy of the neighbouring property. And again, you can just see the change on the image above, the front elevation. You can see how it's been reduced from the previous proposal. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then again, the elevation, the bottom left elevation to St John's Road, is that which sits on the corner of Stanley Road and St John's Road, and you can see it's been slightly tweaked to in an attempt to minimise its impact. And I think the elements of the proposal, as you'll see from the floor plans and the EQ plans, are recessed slightly as well, just to sort of break up that, or attempt to break up that massing on that prominent corner. And then again, the elevation to Stanley Road, you can see with that red line on the left hand side how it's been reduced slightly as well. Next slide, please, Sarah. Floor plans to plots 2 and 3. I think they are any key plans, so you may have already seen it. But so plots 2 and 3 have ground floor parking, and then the dwellings are constructed on top of that. 2 parking spaces for each dwelling, with electric charging points, and cycle stores and bin stores as well included at that level. Next slide, please, Sarah. Then again, first floor plans, just the general living accommodation. Again, should have seen that in your key plan, so I won't dwell on that. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then the bedroom accommodation at first floor level as well. Oh, sorry, no, that sorry, that's yeah, bedroom accommodation. That's at second floor. Sorry. Next slide, please. So then plot 1, again, more traditional in form, 2 stories. The parking spaces for this particular plot are provided externally, so it is a standard 2-story property, with the living accommodation on the ground floor and bedrooms at the first floor. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then just to provide a few sort of images of the proposal. So this is the eastern corner, as we've said before, approaching from the Toff Road junction. Just go to the next slide, please, Sarah. That just shows the proposal as it will be seen in the street scene. Then again, the next slide, please. So then looking with Booth's supermarket behind us, looking towards the western corner of the application site, St John's Road there on the right hand side. If you go to the next slide, please, Sarah. Again, just seeing it in that context. And then, yeah, thank you, Sarah. And then the Stanley Road frontage, existing bungalow and garage. And next slide, please. And then that shows the proposal from the Stanley Road frontage itself. And is there a next slide, Sarah? Yes, there is. So this is the view looking up past the properties on St John's Road, the neighbour at Tynedale there on the right hand side. It's the last roof you can see, the bungalow. Libris Place in the background, and then the CGI, the next CGI should show us the development as proposed as well, fitted into that street scene. And then, is that the last slide? Yeah. And yeah, so it's this, as I say, it's a similar proposal to what we've seen before, but there are those key amendments that have been made, and for the reasons that are set out in the report, Chairman, it is recommended for approval. Thank you,
Mr. Wakefield. So we have some public speakers registered for this item. I'd like to call the first of those now, Councillor Stuart Gardner, who is the ward councillor. So if Councillor Gardner, if you'd like to turn on your camera and microphone, you have 5 minutes, and please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. I know you've had a very long day so far. I hope not to extend it too much. I don't have a problem with the proposed building. It's just in the wrong location. It shouldn't be. These new houses are totally inappropriate for this site on the edge of a conservation area, which I note was not referred to by Mr. The planning officer in his report just now, although it is referred to in the officer's recommendation, the officer's report that was submitted to you for reading. The issue is this is clearly a quart in a pint pot. We have a situation whereby you have a single detached, albeit relatively large detached bungalow, and a separate garage building with some accommodation above it. I think it's an office or something. It's not habitable accommodation. And you then look at the proposal, which is for 2 3-bedroom semi-detached properties, and for a further detached house, 2-storey house. Again, I think it's 3 bedrooms. So we're going from probably a 4-bedroom property to 9 bedrooms on one site. So the level of activity significantly increases. In order to accommodate the necessary parking and the 3-bedroom properties, we've had to go to 3 stories, and this is not an area where there's any 3-story properties. Immediately adjacent to the site, you've got a street where every property is a bungalow, and when by bungalow I mean a traditional bungalow with a low slung roof. It's not one of these chalet bungalows. There's no accommodation in the roof space or facility to achieve that, so it's quite clearly they are low slung bungalows. And then you obviously do have a block of apartments opposite. And I thought, well, this is probably the key where they've taken their guide from the bungalow, the flats on the other side of the road. But of course, they're only 2-storey. It's only 2 stories. It's 2-storey opposite. Although part of that block is 3-storey, on Stanley Road it's only 2-storey. So clearly, this is introducing a 3-storey element to this is totally out of keeping with the character of the area. It's totally at odds with the design principles set out in both the borough's design guide, but also in the adopted design guide of Knutsford Town Council, which forms part. It's a sister document as part of its neighbourhood plan. So that is clearly the inference. So you've got a situation whereby there is now the combination of buildings, the houses, amenity space, the gardens, and parking. In order to squeeze all that onto the site, they've had to have undercroft car parking, resulting in 3 stories of accommodation above, or 2 stories above. So it's a first and a second floor of accommodation. You've got very small gardens, and if you look at the plans relating to the relationship between Tynedale, which is the first bungalow, and the garden of the detached house, you will see it's going to be half the depth. Now, I accept that we have gardens that are much smaller these days, but actually when you're looking at the character of an area, particularly adjacent to a conservation area, you need to ensure that you're leaving the space about the buildings as well as creating the buildings themselves. Interestingly, the SHLA relating to identifies this site as a possible for having additional housing. It says this site, this is a council's own officers say this site is ideal for 2 properties, and I concur. 2 properties on this site would you'll get a really nice proposal. I don't think that there will be too much opposition from the neighbours. 3 is too many, and if you were putting perhaps a 3-bedroom detached house and 2 small 2-bedroom houses, which would require less footprint, it might fit. But no, you've gone for three larger properties, and therefore that's why they've created this overdevelopment of the site. It's completely at odds with its neighbours. It shouldn't. It's not acceptable in this location. I accept it's a good quality design. It just isn't appropriate here. And I also think that we have to look at the fact that even Libris House recognises that the palette of materials to employ is brick. That is not what's being employed here. And I think part of that is is a problem. But I'm sure that the resident, Mr. Pugh, is going to speak about his particular relationships. But actually, you can see from those CGI images, the relationship between the bungalow and the proposed house is not good. It is not good. And the fact that they have had to bring forward fenestration arrangements and layout arrangements to mitigate against the potential harm to the residential amenity of Tynedale means that it's a contrived response and not a natural response.
I'm afraid your 5 minutes are up now.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that members will not accept the officer's recommendation.
There may be questions from them yet.
I accept that is the case.
Members, anybody wishing to ask a question of Councillor Gardner? Councillor Harewood, please. Yes.
Hello, Councillor Harewood.
Hello, Councillor Gardner. The bungalow, oh, sorry, somebody else is on. The bungalow has since been removed, has it not?
Oh, no, it was still there the other day.
Well, it said it's removed here.
No, that's
demolition
the proposal. The proposal is to remove the bungalow. No, there is a bungalow on the site at the moment. And there is a bungalow, but the property next door called Tynedale is also a bungalow. And my concern is the impact on that bungalow next door to the site, not the bungalow that's the existing bungalow will have to be felled to create the proposed house.
Okay. And sorry, how does it compare to the block of flats?
Right, the block of flats opposite is has got a rather odd asymmetrical pitch roof. It is a predominantly on the Stanley Road side. They are 2-story properties, albeit that further back into the site, because it forms part of a larger block, there are 3-story units. But on that frontage, it's only 2-story, and it does have a shallow pitch roof, whereas the proposal is to have flat roofs.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you.
No, they're letting you off lightly today, Councillor Gardner. So if you'd like to turn off your camera and microphone, but do feel free.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to call our next public speaker, Mr. Clive Pugh, who is an objector. Mr. Pugh, if you'd like to turn on your camera and microphone now. Mr. Pugh, you have 3 minutes, and there may be questions afterwards. You appear to be on mute still.
Have you got me now?
We have indeed. Please.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Clive Pugh and I live in Tynedale, the immediate neighbour to the proposed plot 1 on Fernley site. Hopefully you've read and noted my last objections posted on the planning site, which lists many, but not all of the 35 technical faults of this application. The worst fault is the breach of national standards of spacing distances between the new units themselves, the new units in Libris Place, and the most blatant of all, the distance between plot 1 and Tynedale. National standards say there should be a minimum of 12 metres. They are proposing less than half. This results in a 5-metre high brick wall, 4.5 metres from my front door, with a 3-story building overlooking my terrace and garden. This completely destroys the amenity value I currently have. Tweaking will make no difference. These are not my findings, but those of an experienced auditing architect with a lifetime of work in the industry. During the meeting, the obvious signs of overdevelopment of this site will be pointed out. including 36 obscure glazed windows. If this development is approved, history shows that some of the glazing will be replaced with clear glass, leading to conflict between my neighbours and myself. And the same can be said of the absurd screenings of the balconies. Sadly, this application only before you because of the lack of due diligence being applied by the planning department. Why, after the closing date, have there been so many resubmitted changes, alterations, updates, leaving objectors in no position to be able to challenge what is in effect a new application? The most damning example of the poor, or maybe deliberate mismanagement of the site, is the removal of the report by Alexander Fairclough, conservationist. Although her report refers to a previous application, one wonders why it was placed on the website, only to be removed after the closing date, without a follow-up report on the new plans. Alexander states in a report, in my view, the best design form for the new site is as it exists, a single low-impact bungalow. The existing development allows the adjacent areas to retain their local distinctiveness and does not distract or compete in any way with the established character along St John's Road, Stanley Road, or the municipal character of Toff Road. Alexander adds that planning guidance confirms that substantial harm may arise to an historic asset from a development within its setting. Cheshire East has chosen to ignore this person's report. They've decided instead to rely heavily on what they feel is the perfect design, whilst ignoring massive scale. Well, the design may be perfect to Cheshire East planning and the applicant, but it's certainly not that to the residents of St John's Road and Stanley Road, including the residents of Libris Place, who will all, if this is approved, have to live with somebody else's esoteric taste for a long time to come. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Are there any questions, members, to Mr. Pugh? No, in that case, oh, sorry, yes, right at the last minute, Councillor Findlow. Councillor Findlow, you may be on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I didn't quite catch the comment that was made about an assertion that was made about a report having been removed from the website. Could you just say what that was, please?
Yes, I can only assume that the local authority commissioned Alexandra Fairclough, who's a conservationist, to submit a report. And for some reason, it popped up on this site originally before the objections were the final date for. And she clearly spoke strongly against this application in relation to the conservation area or the conservation areas. But since then, it seems to have disappeared. I can't find it anywhere on the site. And also, why wasn't, because they changed it was about the previous application, but it was on this website. But if that was the case, why didn't they just ask her to submit another report? Instead, they've ignored conservation and just gone for the design.
Thank you. Any further questions, members? Okay, in that case, Mr. Pugh, if I could ask you to now turn off your camera and microphone, and I will invite the final speaker for this item, Mrs. Georgina Daintith, who is the agent for the applicant. Mrs. Daintith, if I could ask you to turn on your camera and microphone and address the committee. You have 3 minutes. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. This scheme is a residential development of 3 three-bedroom properties on a brownfield site in a sustainable location. It has sought to address the reasons for refusal on the previous scheme by making a number of changes that reduce the overall scale and mass of the development. This is achieved by a reduction in the amount of 2-storey development on plot 1 to respond to concerns raised by the occupier of neighbouring Tynedale. A reduction in footprint and built form on plots 2 and 3, meaning the plots are pulled away from the junction of Stanley Road. This results in the provision of larger private garden spaces, particularly to plot 3, which addresses a previous concern of the committee. On plots 2 and 3, the number of projections on the front and rear elevations has been reduced from 3 to 2. This assists in breaking up the mass and appearance of the building. The height of the building remains similar to that of Libris Place opposite. The material palettes have been amended to include more bricks to complement the existing buildings in the area. The scheme does include 10 obscure windows. However, due to internal layout and fenestration refigurations, the extent of the use is minimised and these are only placed in non-habitable rooms. The committee report confirms there are no significant concerns with regards to loss of light or visual intrusion that will cause amenity issues to neighbouring properties or future occupiers. The development of 3 houses represents less than a 10% increase above the existing footprint and is not considered to be overdevelopment in this location because the site is a brownfield site and in a sustainable location. Given its location, the type of properties proposed will be suitable for a wide range of occupiers, assisting in meeting housing needs and satisfying policy H1 of the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan. The buildings have been designed to be energy efficient and reduce carbon footprint. Measures such as solar panels, triple glazing, air source heat pumps and rainwater harvesting have been designed into the properties. The flat roof construction enables the creation of green roofs to boost thermal property and support wildlife. The revised scheme, with its reduced scale and mass, responds to previous concerns of the committee, and the design of the scheme optimises the site's prominent location within the street scene to provide an attractive feature which respects the character of Knutsford in line with policies H2 and D1 of the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan. The scheme represents the best use of a brownfield site in a highly sustainable location. I'd like to thank the officers for their support and recommendation for approval and respectfully request that the committee consider this application favourably and move to approve the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dainty. Any questions from members, please? Yes, Councillor Harewood, please. Councillor Harewood, we can't hear you at the moment.
Yes, you can hear me now.
We can
Thank
now.
you very much. It says here the reconfiguration of fenestration. How is it? How much reconfiguration has happened, please? Because these number of obscure windows that one speaker said, is it reduced? How have you done that?
Yes, we've looked at the layout of the properties and where the windows sit, and we've managed to reduce the obscure glazing down from 36 to only 10, and these are placed in non-habitable rooms, so they're either in the bathrooms or the en-suites or stairwells, and that's just by looking at the internal layouts of the properties in particularly plots 2 and 3.
Has numbers changed or just going around it in a different?
No, we've
less
just
numbers.
It's still 3 properties with 3 bedrooms each.
I mean the windows. Obscure
the windows.
Less
the
obscure
number
windows?
of obscure glazed windows has reduced.
2 from what to what?
From, I think we counted 36 in the previous scheme down to 10.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane, please.
Yes, hello, Ms. Dangerous. Just a question, please, information-wise. Fernley, I take it that's currently with its bungalow status is part of the St John's conservation area. That goes all the way down St John's Road, including Tynedale. Is that the way it stands at present? Is it a specific conservation area, just for information?
The Fernley site's not within a specific conservation area. It does sit between St John's and the town centre conservation area, but itself is not within the conservation area.
So that the conservation area is Tynedale all the way down St John's Road. Is that where it is? Do you know offhand? Just out of interest.
Sorry, Tynedale's not included in any conservation area.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Smetham, please.
Thank you. If this application were to be approved and the one at appeal were approved, which one would go ahead?
I think this one in front of us would be the preferred scheme. But I can't speak for the developer on that. But I think the developer has worked with the town council and the planning officers to come to a scheme that is agreeable and has tried to address all the objections. And I think this scheme presented today has certainly increased the garden sizes, which was an issue before, and it's reduced the number of obscured windows within the site, which was a concern raised by committee previously. So I would suggest that this one presented today will be the favourable one for development.
Thank you.
Councillor Holland, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'm here, Chair. Hi, Mrs. Dainty. I just was curious because you mentioned that the site it's classed as a brownfield site. So I just wanted you to clarify that, because I would have assumed, looking at the plans and everything, that it was an empty bungalow. Could you just clarify why it's a brownfield site or classed as a brownfield site? Thank you.
We'd class it as a brownfield or previously developed site because there is a bungalow on the site, and the garage is on the site as well. So that counts towards the footprint in the built form.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Findlow, please.
Thank you. Why have you opted for, quite unusually, undercroft parking? Is it to ensure that you get in the number of required properties?
Well, undercroft parking is a practice that's undertaken in modern planning. Yes, it does increase the number of properties we can build on site, and the height of the building then makes it commensurate to Libris Place opposite. The height of the building makes it an ideal opportunity to create a gateway, as we discussed in the previous application. And yes, it is common practice on sites.
Okay, I've not come across it before particularly. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. So in that case, Mrs. Daintith, if I could ask you now to turn off your camera and microphone, but do please feel free to remain in the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if I could just ask Mr. Wakefield, our planning officer, are there any issues that have been raised there during the public speaking that you would like to address before we move to members' questions?
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, just a couple. Just in terms of Councillor Gardner's comments about the three-storey appearance of the dwellings being out of keeping, I think, and in fairness to Councillor Gardner, he did acknowledge that there were some in the local area towards the back of Libris Place. And I think it's important to note that they do exist. And similarly, as you go round the corner onto St John's Road, I think, and this is perhaps more significant in that yes, we've got St John's Road. As you head down it from Stanley Road, you've got bungalows on the left-hand side. However, on the right-hand side, you've got much more substantial sort of Victorian or older residential properties, semi-detached properties, and that's where the conservation area starts. So the conservation area is on the right-hand side of St John's Road as you head down from Stanley Road. And in there are these substantial dwellings that some of which, they're up to 10 metres in height. The application properties are 8.6 metres and, at a maximum. So in terms of relative heights and presence in the, how alien that height and that appearance is in the character of the area, I suppose the point I'm making is there are other properties in the locality that do have those heights and do have those 3 stories. Including within the conservation area. Added in terms of Mr. Pugh's comments in terms of the distances and the impact on Tynedale, I think those are set out best on page 89 of the report, so I won't go through those in any great detail. I did also notice comments about the heritage comments appearing on the website and then being removed from the website, and I think as far as I'm aware, we didn't get any new comments from our heritage officer on the current application, but we did have comments on the last application, and whilst Mr. Pugh did make reference to them. My understanding of those comments are as detailed on page 88, whereby the conservation officers I highlighted that it would relate in form and mass to the library apartment development at Leibris Place on the opposite side of Stanley Road. So that was my understanding. That's our understanding of the heritage comments. That they didn't raise any specific objections to the proposal. Same with the urban design officer as well. And then, yeah, I just made a note about Councillor McFarlane's query to the speaker about the conservation area. But as I say, that's on the right-hand side of Stanley Road. So those bungalows on the left, which include Tynedale, are not included in the conservation area or the application site as well. That's excluded as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wakefield. I'll now move on to questions from members back to our officers, and I've got Councillor Puddicombe indicating.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Wakefield, you mentioned that we had looked at this, an application for this site back in June, and that was now at appeal. Would you say then the fact that we've received this revised application for the same site means that they are not confident of winning that appeal? And also, I recall previously you have advised us that when a new application is received for a site where we had a previous application refused, there does have to be material changes. Do you think there are sufficient material changes here, or how material must those changes be for us to be able to look at it again?
I think we probably shouldn't speculate on the likelihood of success of an appeal in a public meeting, but thank you.
Might say that.
Thank you, Councillor Puddicombe. I'll just ask, are there any further questions before I go back to Mr. Wakefield? No. Okay, Mr. Wakefield, please. I think you're on mute, Paul.
Sorry, just on that particular point in terms of the appeal, I think in fairness to the applicants, and I think it's good practice to try and address reasons for refusal through an application process. I think ideally we would have done that before, but an appeal had been submitted. But I think like you said, Chairman, we can't speculate on the possible success of an appeal, but I think the applicant is looking at potential options for what the council would accept, which might potentially be a quicker way to an approval than an appeal. And similarly, obviously, the success of the appeal we don't know about. But then in terms of the material changes, then yes, we as officers, we feel that there are changes made, which I think were evident within the plans in terms of the dashed red lines that shows the extent of the reductions, if you like, in terms of the scale of the building. So yeah, we do feel there are material changes, but I suppose ultimately it comes down to the decision maker. Although the local plan, as a local planning authority, we have accepted the application and we are dealing with it as a registered application. So we are obliged to come to a decision on it as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Wakefield. And Councillor Harewood has a question, please.
Thank.
You've got on to mute, Councillor Harewood.
And thank you. I think my question has just been answered, because I feel that this application is not refusing housing, but it's overdevelopment. But Mr. Wakefield has just said that because it has been looked at again and smaller, maybe that overdevelopment is not as strong as previously it had been. Because I feel there's some, it looks like an overdevelopment, but there you go. It's not sustained because the buildings are smaller, has been drawn smaller.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. I sense that we've naturally moved into the debate. Normally we would go to the local ward member. In this case, however, Councillor Dean has left the meeting, but he did leave some comments before leaving, which I'll ask our Democratic Services Officer, Sarah Baxter, to read out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. This application is the latest in a long line of applications to demolish a single bungalow on this triangular corner site and build 3 houses. The others have been refused on the grounds of overdevelopment of the site and the planned buildings being overbearing and out of character with the adjoining single-storey buildings on St John's Road, contrary to various policies in the Cheshire East Local Plan Strategy and the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan. These latest plans try hard to overcome the problems, but are these changes sufficient to negate the previous reasons for refusal? This is what the committee must decide. The side of plot 1 is still only 4.5 metres from Tynedale and in 2 storeys in height. This is significantly less than Cheshire East separation standards. The other major material issue is that the adopted Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan only allows development in existing gardens in exceptional circumstances. Have any exceptional circumstances been demonstrated? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other members wishing to contribute to the debate? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, I would like to propose that the proposition be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I'm just making a note of that. And now then, I've also got Councillor Smetham and Councillor Harewood. Councillor Smetham, please.
Thank you. Given my memory tells me last time when this came to us for a decision, I think I approved it or voted for it. So it would be inconsistent now that the application is smaller and more acceptable to not do the same thing. So I will second Councillor Murphy's proposal for approval.
Thank you for that, Councillor Smetham. Councillor Harewood?
I am still unsure of this because the whole thing seems so packed in. So I'm not saying anything at the moment because I feel that with the parking, everything is so packed into this space. So I'll leave it for now and see how that goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Councillor Findlow, please.
Yeah, I think this is another classic example of plot or site cramming. It might be suitable somewhere, but I'm not convinced that it's necessarily suitable in the current location, this strange triangular piece of land. I'm also concerned about the impact on Tynedale, the immediate neighbour, and the impact, all right, it's not within, I think there are 2 conservation areas involved here. It's not within them, but it's not far away from them. It's adjacent or in the proximity of the 2 conservation areas and has an impact presumably on that. In relation to the neighbourhood plan, I'm not sure what the exceptional circumstances are or what the evidence is for them. So I do have some reservations about this. It might be a suitable design and a suitable proposal elsewhere, but I'm not necessarily convinced that this is the right location for it.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane, please.
Yes, Chair, I agree in that. It is, I would say, out of character to the rest of St John's Wood and Tynedale just next door. And there's nothing wrong with the design at all. It looks very interesting indeed, but I just think perhaps it's the wrong place to put in what is it's been tweaked a bit since June, but it's still a lot of mass in that particular plot. I'm still thinking about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Well, it has been proposed and seconded, so I am prepared to go to the vote in the absence of any further comments. Yes, Councillor Smetham.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that I find it quite strange that we are very keen on making sure that there are enough properties for our residents, and including smaller ones, but we don't seem very keen on actually approving them when they come before us. So just a thought that this would add to the pot of housing, and it doesn't seem too bad for Knutsford. It blends in with the local vernacular, and lots of mitigation has been proposed to make the plan better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smetham. Councillor Holland, please, and then I've got Councillor Findlow and Councillor Harewood.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with the comments that Councillor Smetham has raised, that it would add to the offering of more housing, particularly perhaps smaller ones in this area. However, I have a grave concern about taking very much needed bungalows out of the equation, something that I am totally against. I think the fact that it's a bungalow is really difficult for me completely, because I'm very much all for keeping and embracing bungalows, nurturing them, redeveloping them and putting them back into circulation. I'm not at all in favour of knocking them down. So I'm really struggling with this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harewood, please.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come in again. I do respect Councillor Smetham's views, but we want housing that will go for well-being. Too small is not livable. Too little is not good enough. We can do better. We can do better. And I feel it's all cramped up there, and that's not good enough for people's growth. I'm sorry. I really am struggling to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Findlow.
I do agree with Councillor Harewood that we should be setting an example. I don't think this is necessarily a good example. My principal point has been made very adequately by Sally Holland. I absolutely agree with her, and I could tell you stories about bungalows in my ward, but I will not, and what happened to them because of planning applications, but I will not tie your patience, Chairman, with that. But we do have an adequate and more than adequate, after much effort, housing supply. So we have a cushion there too. So I'm not convinced on that point.
Thanks, Councillor Findlow, and then Councillor Braithwaite, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Findlow, and I have real concerns about the impacts on Tyndale. You've got to maintain residential amenity, so I can't support the approval, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you, members. It has been proposed by Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Smetham for approval. Before I take the vote, are there any comments from our planning officer, please?
Sorry, Chairman. No, nothing to add at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, so in that case, I will take the vote on this as usual by roll call. So it's proposed for approval. Please indicate for, against or not voting on the proposal of approval. Councillor Braithwaite.
Against.
Councillor Findlow.
Against.
Councillor Harewood.
Not voting.
Councillor Holland.
Against.
Councillor McFarlane.
Against.
Councillor Murphy.
For.
Councillor Mannion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mannion has left. Councillor Nicholas.
For.
Councillor Widdicombe.
Not voting.
Councillor Smetham.
For.
And myself, Councillor Craig Brown, also not voting. 4 against, 3 in favour.
1, 2, 3 in favour. 1, 2, yeah, 4 against and 3 not voting.
Yeah, okay, so members, that proposal for approval is lost. There were 3 votes in favour, 4 against, and 3 members not voting. So we will need to have a counter proposal in order to move forwards.
I hesitate to try my luck again.
I'll take that as a proposal for refusal, Councillor Finlow, but I think we'll need you to provide some reasons.
That's exactly why I hesitated. The attrition.
I'm not sure I can take that as a proposal, I'm afraid, in that case. Mr. Wakefield?
It's not a proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, obviously there was a good amount of discussion before we took the vote on that approval, with members expressing their various concerns about the application, and I suppose that they seem to follow the similar lines to where we were before with the previous scheme. I think it just sounds like they may not have been. Members aren't satisfied with the changes that have been made adequately address the previous reasons for refusal, which related to, the previous reasons for refusal is set out in the report. Actually, that's probably the best place to go to. And bear with me. And so if that is actually the case, that members don't feel like those reasons have been addressed, then this could be the best place to start. Somewhere. Just bear with me.
Yes, I think it's on page 80.
80. Yes, there we go. Midway through, yeah. So I'll just leave that there for now, and I'll let the debate continue. Thank you, Chairman.
So thanks very much, Mr. Wakefield. So just with reference to page 80 and the reasons from last time, the development would be contrary to policies SD2 and SE1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan and policies D1, D2 and H2 of the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan. And the objections were in terms of overdevelopment by virtue of scale and form, and overbearing and out of character with the adjoining single-storey properties on St John's Road. So it seems as though the suggestion is that, and certainly on having listened to the debate so far, that many, if not all, of those previous reasons are still held by a majority of members.
Agreed.
So we'll need a formal proposal. Councillor Findlow, would you like to propose?
Well, I did say I didn't want to try my luck again, but go on then, all right.
For the reasons that I've just read out from the previous application?
Without doubt. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Councillor Harewood? I think you're on mute, Councillor Harewood. Still on mute. Councillor Harewood, we can't hear you.
I feel it compromises lifestyle, living, being, growing. It compromises. I can't approve of that. It's too small. It's too packed. Too much housing for people. Too little housing for too many people.
Thank you. Councillor Puddicombe, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to second the proposal on the table now from Councillor Finlow.
I've just seconded it.
I didn't take your comments as a formal seconding of the proposal, Councillor Harewood, so I've taken Councillor Puddicombe's instead.
Never mind what I did. It doesn't matter.
Thank you. So I'll just, nobody else wants to contribute, so I'll just go back to our officer, Mr. Wakefield, check that he's happy with those reasons for refusal, which replicate section 1 in the report on page 80 from the previous application.
Yeah, So it is virtually, it is the same reason for refusal as the last time, but I agree. It does sound like that picks up the points that members have raised with regards to this particular application, and it does show that consistency as well with the previous decision as well.
Put it to the vote.
Sorry, thank you very much. So we will move to the vote in that case. Been proposed by Councillor Findlow, seconded by Councillor Puddicombe for refusal. Please indicate as I call your name whether you are for, against or not voting on the proposal to refuse. Councillor Braithwaite, please.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Findlow.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Harewood.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Yes, I'm for refusal.
Thank you. Councillor McFarlane.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholas.
Against.
And Councillor Puddicombe.
For.
Councillor Smetham.
Against.
And Councillor Craig Brown for. Thank you very much. So, members, just to report back, that is 7 votes for and 3 against. So that application is clearly refused. And that brings us finally to the end of today's meeting. So thank you very much, members, for your patience. And I realise it's been a very long day. See you again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and everybody.